would have been my day if I could dance with you tonight. If your man around, tell him just walk out, it's alright. Tell me and limp on your leg, then just squeeze it when you whine. If be your one and only, where you waistline move, you got me man just like I'm Stony. Girl, mash up your foot, but now she back just like a Kobe. Step up to the bar, take a couple shots, no that's Ginobili. Just hold me, please. Your body's so dangerous. People in my watches, but they don't mean a thing to us. No, like how you're whining. Oh, baby, keep that timing. Oh, like how you're moving. Baby, put your back into it. Like how you're moving. I'll be the one you want in your life. What will your friends say if I hold you tonight? I'll be the one you want in your life. What will your friends say if I hold you tonight? This song for the Spanish girls, we call me Papi Chulo. Same man for the yardie girls, we kick out like a judo. Show me all the dirty tricks and nasty tricks that you know. You go boss a wine and I will surely try control ya. If your man not coming off to see me and try fight me, but don't you try to dance up on the man, just try to spite me. If you try to make me jealous, I can tell you that's unlikely. Give it to you rough and I could give it to you lightly. A girl like your love and nobody else can take it, my baby. A girl like your love and nobody else can take it, my baby. Your love, nobody else take it, my baby. A girl is your love, nobody else can take it, my baby. I'll be the one you want in your life. What will your friends say if I hold you tonight? I'll be the one you want in your life. What will your friends say if I hold you tonight? If you see a girl you want wine on, just let me hear you say, oh, oh, oh. So tell me if you see a girl you want wine fun. Just let me hear you say, oh, oh, oh. If you see a girl you want wine on, just let me hear you say, oh, oh, oh. So tell me if you see a girl you want wine fun. Just let me hear you say, oh, oh, oh. I'll be the one you want in your life. What will your friends say if I hold you tonight? I'll be the one you want in your life. What will your friends say if I hold you tonight?
The St. Kitts and Nevis Independence 40 Committee presents conversations, reflections, and the way forward. This interactive discussion series provides an in-depth view of the trials and achievements of the past, as well as the accomplishments, threats, and tremendous opportunities of today and in the coming years that will transform the Twin Island Federation into a model sustainable island state. serving as a beacon for all. On this edition, we examine universal education and CFBC.
Hello everyone and welcome to the Kuna Caribbean Conference Center in Fort Leonard, Bastere. I'm Ian Richards, welcoming you to Conversations, Reflections, and the Way Forward. Conversations is a 7-part engagement series commissioned by the Independence 40 Committee. Tonight, we examine universal education and the Clarence Fitzroy Bryant College. A good and independent citizenry promotes quality, equality, and encourages a modern society. Our conversation begins now with the local educators, Sharon Rattan, Tamu Byron, Zanella Claxton, and Dr. Andrea Busu. Ladies, welcome to Conversation.
Thank you. Thank you.
So we want to start with universal education in a sense, but we want to get a sense first of what the education system was like before universal education was introduced. Ms. Rattan, perhaps you begin. You have a bit of a historian there.
Yes, I hope I do justice. Thank you for having me here this evening. What we have to notice, remember this date, 1834, emancipation was granted. 1835, the Negro Education Grant. I don't like the name. Negro Education Grant was established to provide education. It was a very meager attempt to provide education for our free Black people. However, moving right along, if we recall, many churches, a lot of this was channeled through churches. Missionaries, they were called at the time, to make sure that the Black people received education. However, of course, as I said, it was meager, it was totally inadequate. And the approach then was, for the churches, because through the Bible, they were reinforcing obedience, because that is what the economy at the time needed, that you were supposed to do what you were told. Of course, many persons were taught to read. However, when we know about the 1930s, the Buckley's riots, that was not only about people
Buckley's uprising.
Uprising. Yes, let me stop. St. Kitts has now termed it the Buckley's uprising. And it was not only about lack of education opportunities, it was the health, the working conditions, etc. But let us fast forward to how the countries post the Buckley's uprising set to chart their course for education. Keep in mind, meager opportunities. There were before 1966 is a key date, significant date in our history, because that is when universal education was introduced. Prior to that, you had to pay fees, which hindered persons. The opportunities were very limited for persons to receive an education. But we have to thank the pioneers like our first national hero, the Right Excellent, Sir Robert Llewellyn Bradshaw, who had vision. And working along with men like Clarence Fitzroy Bryant, who the college is now named after St. John Payne, all of them, those men had vision for education. And the main thesis was education is a way out, and till today, it is still a way out. So that is when it first started with the opening of the Sandy Point High School then in 1966. Of course, it created quite an uproar, because Black people pick me. I would go between the standard English and the dialect for emphasis. Black people pick me was now going to school with the persons who were in the, what do I call them, the middle class, landed gentry, etc.
Before you continue, Ms. Rattan, because we want to stick in the period before universal education. And so tell us a bit about, and of course any of you ladies can jump in if there's something that you'd have to share as well too. But with regards to what was taught in the schools before, you said it was meager. So what basically was it? Was it just learning how to read and write? Reading, writing, and arithmetic. That's what they call them, the 3 R's. Mm-hmm. And it was mainly governed by the mother colony
And those days, if you speak to people in the 1930s, 40s, they would tell you the administrators came to St. Kitts, and it was rooted in the rote system. This is where we got the rote learning from, because children, and my grandmother told me, and many other persons, my parents would tell them, that they learned poems about England. And some of them today can still remember, because it was about powering or building up that brain muscle to recall all that you know about England. And it wasn't as relevant. But they learned things about different countries in the world.
And was it just limited to, at least at what age was it expanded to in terms of the learning? Was it just preschool? Was it elementary school, what we call primary school? Was it secondary? How did that? Was it
nothing called preschool, my dear. It was primary, the elementary part. After that, you did not have the transition like what we have. Everybody goes to secondary school. That's when you had prohibitive fees. So only who could afford to go to the school can go. But most people stopped in those days at the elementary level.
Okay. Let me throw out the question so anyone can answer, and I would like to hear a bit more from the other guests that we have here, because I recall, as you just mentioned, Ms. Rattan, the examination fees. We know the story of, and who comes to mind for me would be the former Prime Minister, now Senior Minister in government, Dr. Denzil Douglas, where he was not able to attend school per se, but the community rallied together, essentially, and ensured that they was able to provide for him in terms of to fund his education. Was any bit of that done in Nevis or throughout St. Kitts that anyone else would know of?
Well, my mother is a Nevisian. I'm a Nevisian, and she would speak often of her grammar school days and how onerous it was for people from Nevis to come to what we now call the sixth form, right? So there was one. And not only were there fees, but if you were a Nevisian, you had to find somewhere to board. And so you had to find, maybe a family member, generous friend. And so it was, quite difficult to access education, I would say particularly for those in Nevis. So my mother, Terry Nisbet, she would have attended grammar school. My father, Dr. Henry Brown, similar situation, same situation. And we have some other notable persons, Junie Liebert, he was all in that time. And then if you were unable to make it into grammar school, you had this, the boys, you would come down to the boys' school. And, so there was a lot of elitism that existed even at that time. And what Ms. Rattan was speaking about when it comes to the transition from primary into secondary, what St. Kitts pioneered really was the removal of that common entrance system where you had to test into secondary school, and depending on your grade or the outcome, you would not be able to access education. And St. Kitts was the first island, yes, am I correct, yes, who would have abolished common entrance. And interestingly, we still have countries in the region who do engage in that common entrance situation. And I believe that specific element of establishing that really is what I would say would have opened up universal access.
So, go ahead, Ms. Basu.
And it depends on the universal access in Nevis, and I'm sure it may have happened in St. Kitts, that there was also a distinction if you lived in the town versus if you lived in the country. Now, I lived in the country. I grew up in Butler's Village. I attended St. James's Whitehall School, but only a selected handful could go to the high schools in Charlestown. There was no Gingerland, Charlestown was it. And with the common entrance, it was so discriminatory because I lived in the country, I could not access high school as quickly as I could have accessed high school. I mean, at the age of 10, 11, I was ready for high school. But then I was not allowed because only 1 or 2 persons from the primary school was allowed into the high school. So you see the stratas. I mean, so so many things to prevent you from accessing education, a higher education, even in my time.
And before
And
my time.
her mother is older than me, obviously, so you would know that it went on for a while.
Well, and we know all this entire conversation takes place before my time. But similar to what Dr. Brown alluded to, there were persons in Nevis, especially in the rural areas as well, who experienced, and those are the areas where they had the farming communities and the fishing communities. Some of them were able to get into the grammar school. However, because of the economic situation, it was difficult. And interestingly, in a conversation, I learned that prior to 1973, you had to be 12 years old to get into the secondary school. And so even if you had mastered the curriculum and you had done everything that you needed to do to move on to the next level, that was not allowed. And so in 1973, that changed, and the notice that came out from the Ministry of Education, which at that point, all of education matters were dealt with in St. Kitts. So initially, we had one officer who collaborated with the Education Department or Ministry in St. Kitts. And so the notice came out in 1973 that effective now, if the person will turn 12 in that year and you can prove that they are academically inclined and would be able to demonstrate mastery, that consideration can be given for them to get to secondary school prior to age 12.
Now, with the grammar school, the St. Kitts Grammar School being the sole secondary institution in the Federation at that time, how would you say that it impacted the social mobility of our people? Anyone?
It was a sign of great status going to the grammar school. It produced a community of people up to now who have excelled. They have done well for our countries. Many of them are in the diaspora. Many of them live here now. And it's a community that they're very proud of because it was deemed a very good education. You were getting the best of the best there. And when you went to grammar school, parents sat down and they looked at their children walk into school because they got into the grammar school. So it was with a great sense of pride. And this, what I want to emphasize about the universal access is that this removed all of that, where every child in St. Kitts and Nevis had the opportunity now to go. So we transitioned from that to say, you have equal opportunity to attend the high schools that were provided for. So our system transitioned from that to now, it still exists, compulsory education from 12 years of schooling, that's compulsory, primary to secondary, up to 5 to 6 years.
So for those who couldn't get into the St. Kitts Grammar School for whatever reasons, and you just mentioned that there were a number of obstacles that were in their way, what were the options? What did they have to do?
They didn't have any options at that time. For grammar school, they didn't
Obstacles
have
could have been access, could have been family, especially if you lived in Nevis. To come to grammar school in St. Kitts, you would have had to connect to a family member or some friend or someone to stay because you had to live in St. Kitts. And everybody did not have that opportunity because they may not have had family members so that they can have access to it.
I think the long and short of it is that your education journey ended way too soon. And so if you did not have the opportunity, you transitioned into the world of work. Yeah. And whether it be through apprenticeships or some other area, but at the end of the day, your academic journey ended because you couldn't access grammar school.
Let me emphasize, Ian, too, that there were children who were just as bright. But remember the discriminatory context in which that existed at that time. So some persons, some young people, they were robbed of the opportunity because they didn't come from a particular family.
Yes.
You understand? You didn't have that family name and status. And this is why it was so pioneering and such a bold move by the leaders then, a bold visionary move by the leaders then, to make this decision. It was met with a lot of opposition, you know. Know that. It was met, even though it was a very good decision, it was met with a lot of
So,
opposition.
Ms. Rotham, what would you say were the motivating factors that led to universal education?
Access for everybody, an equal opportunity for education. Not only that, the overriding factor is that education is our way out because of our economic circumstances, and that every child should have that opportunity. That was the motivating factor, because education, it's a refrain we hear all the time. It is the way out. It is the way to improve yourself, you know, help yourself, get a better
Upward
education,
mobility.
upward mobility. Yes, it was so that even when they were exposed and other persons were exposed coming out of the grammar school and they went to teach, that was a very big job then, you know, very big job. You were a teacher. In the eyes of everybody, you had done extremely well.
So you said that there were obstacles. Tell us a bit about some of those obstacles. That the political pressure that made it not popular for them to establish universal education.
No, well, because status, elitism was very prominent then. That kind of opposition, you know, especially when that was removed. I recall getting stories that some families sent their children to school in Barbados as a result of that decision.
So you said that universal education began essentially in 1966.
With the opening of the Sandy Point High School.
Right. So then,
That
can
was
you
the
tell
first
us,
high school.
can anyone share a bit of the insight in terms of like the subjects that were done, the content, the local content that was included in the curriculum at that time? Or was it still the 3 R's?
Well, I think they would have started that with that emphasis of the 3 R's, but then you had civics and those sorts of things. It wouldn't be as broad as now, but within the context at the time, it would have gone beyond the 3 R's. I know civics was very important, and what was also very important, it was very rigid in terms of your schedule. You had to, like for example, let me give a real example. Some persons said they need to teach children to be clean. We say that now. But if you speak to people who went to that school at that time, they have to show their nails, they have to show their socks, they have to show how clean their shoes were. And that was not a subject, but it was part of how the school was organized.
And how do you think, ladies, that would have had a psychological impact on a child who is attending school?
Well, that's an interesting question because to my mind, we normalize things. And I believe that, you know, this kind of rigidity would have been accepted. And we still see some of those elements today. And really, it is a vestige of imperialism. It is colonialism. And, you know, even today, we struggle with neo-colonial behaviors and neo-colonial ways of teaching, even today in our systems, which we have normalized. And so I wasn't, you know, a child at that time going through these circumstances. But, you know, I would have gone to Bastia High School. You would have gone to Bastia High School. And, you know, your cleats had to, you know, nothing really has shifted in terms of this type of rigidity. And that is unfortunate. I know that we are moving, the Minister of Education is moving to change some of that colonial stance with the move to modifying the HERE policy. And though, you know, a lot of persons might feel like, you know, this is not particularly important, it is important because it signifies a move away from the colonial shackles. Because our Black children should be able to wear their hair braided or otherwise, as he says, within guidelines. Everything else was really something that we have inherited from, you know, the times of slavery and keeping Black people and Black children in their places.
And Ms. Claxton and Ms. Dr. Busu, forgive me. Of course, I have to ask, because on our very first conversation, we looked at the road to independence. And, you know, we spoke a lot about some of the challenges between St. Kitts, Nevis, and Anguilla. Mm-hmm. So How would you say the education system was back then in the time of universal education when it was introduced? Because, of course, we heard Ms. Rattan and Ms. Byron speak about, the elitism and the fact that, these things were normalized, so to speak. Did you find, or do you think that in terms of Nevis, of course, everything was centralized, St. Kitts was looked at as the capital. It had the different benefits and so. Do you think in Nevis that there was that sort of added pressure on the students, or did they have equal access? Was it fair? What do you think that was like?
Equal access. For who? Equal access for the elite, equal access for the intelligent, equal access for who was deemed smart, but not equal access for those who were slower. That's something that we had to look at, because our system is such an elite system that if you could not perform at a certain level, you weren't considered important. You weren't given access. And that's why a lot of people stayed home. They kept their children home. They went into farming and things like that. Now, when universal education came along, then Nevis, the Charleston Secondary School, I know they had classes for who we called college, but college was not college. College was referred to for those children who were unable, who had some form of disability, learning disability, and could not access the regular curriculum. So in our heads, we thought that our education system is good and elite, but we were still leaving out a group of people.
I think in addition to that, as Dr. Busse said initially, we had the Charlestown Secondary School as the main secondary school in the first instance, 73 years in existence. And I've heard the stories of at the Charlestown Secondary School, even when they expanded, you had the senior wing. And the senior wing was for persons who were not academically inclined. At the Gingerland Secondary School, and the Gingerland Secondary School is celebrating their 50th anniversary this year. Gingerland Secondary started off as a place similar, with a similar sense of persons who were not academically inclined and couldn't succeed went to the Gingerland Secondary School, and those who were in the community who were academically inclined and were allowed to went to the Charlestown Secondary School, even though they lived in Charlestown. And just like Dr. Busse said, we had the college in Gingerland as well, and that existed up until the early 2000s or maybe mid-2000s, where the learning support, we referred to it as learning support, we referred to it as remedial section at that point. But for students who needed the extra support, they were referred to as college and remedial wing. You're counting cars, and so even within the students, that's how they spoke about each other.
May I just say, I think we have fast forwarded into a recent time from where you were with the last question, because these are more recent issues. But I think the common thread is that the nuances of discrimination still exist in the system.
Oh, yes, it does.
That is a colonial atrocity,
Vestiges of colonialism.
Yes, so I think those are examples of how it is now. Because at the time, as Dr. Tamo said, those were normalized. And I think we have now become normalized. And these are some of the concerns. But I think that we need to acknowledge and be proud of, I'm going to emphasize this, be proud of that bold decision for universal access and all of the attempts to broaden the universal education in St. Kitts and Nevis. It didn't happen overnight. It took a while, started with a bold decision, and it took some time. And that has to be acknowledged at this 40th anniversary. But then we need now to look beyond. What are the lessons we have learned after these 40 years, with this education system? Is it now fit for purpose? To what extent do these discriminatory hues still exist?
I'd like to interject here where Ms. Rattan spoke about fit for purpose. And actually at CFBC, one of our board pillars is 21st century competitive programs that are fit for purpose, context, and community. And so that is one of the lenses that we will use to make decisions. Because when we begin speaking about universal access, there is still a discussion to be had about equity of access. And actually, what does education actually mean, right? And so if we are hyper-focused on degrees, right? Everybody wants a bachelor's, everybody, you know? If we, as an institution that serves the community, if we are siloed there, we will be failing, because education is much broader, right? The skills, right? Certifications. The world is changing. What people desire, what people want is changing. And just from a numbers perspective, if we focus solely on bachelor's programs or even associate degree programs, how many persons can matriculate into those programs, which means we leave a significant number of potential learners behind, and how many people want to pursue those programs, because it's an agile world now, and certifications, etc. That's what is marketable in this kind of fourth to the fifth industrial revolution that is happening. So I think that's important to note.
That's a topic that we'll delve into a bit later as we discuss more modern times as it relates to education. Now, can we talk about the introduction of universal education? Of course, as we discussed, there was a need to essentially decentralize school. We already established that the grammar school, as in St. Kitts, was the only one. We spoke about the Charlestown Secondary School being established, and of course the Sandy Point Secondary School, which is now the Charlestown Mill Secondary School. But talk to us a bit about the importance of having schools built around the Federation.
Increase access. Because everybody, remember, we went through a history of everybody coming to Bastille. So you now gave opportunity for all of the other communities to access school. And in Nevis,
And in Nevis, we have a sixth form now. So, there is, depending on what is offered at CFBC versus Nevis sixth form, you still have that opportunity that you can do either or. But there is a sixth form on Nevis. So you don't necessarily have to travel to St. Kitts if you're choosing something that is offered in Nevis. But I had a thought when my dear cousin here was talking. And it's that the purpose of, as he said, CFBC, I would think that one of the purposes of CFBC is to create professionals that see themselves as change agents. Because if you're going into a system and you are prepared to maintain the status quo that definitely needs some changes, you're not really adding to the richness of the place and advancing us. But what are the things that I can change? What are the things, for example, if a teacher, the product that comes from CFBC must be a product that says, what can I change in the classroom and make it different to the classroom that I attended? Because, the classroom that I attended was probably very elitist. What would I, as a teacher, do to make it accessible for all? Those are the things that we probably need to think about at CFBC, the product. Mm-hmm. Is the product going to be change agents? Are the products going to maintain the status quo, the elitism, the discrimination, or are we going to move forward? Those are questions that we probably need to think about.
And I think in addition, because it's not just CFBC, that mindset has to start as
well, I guess I said CFBC because the topic is CFBC.
Yes, but throughout the system, that has to be the case. But in terms of having institutions throughout the Federation and within the different communities, not just access, but equitable access. I think that we have to hone in on that we try to create a standard and have some level of quality control so that with the construction of these various sites and institutions, that they are not only fit for purpose, but that you don't get a sense of, and we still see that here within the Federation, where persons prefer to go to one institution because they feel that the quality isn't the same.
But let me point out that over time, because as you said, we have to go back to the lower level of the schools before CFBC. Over time, over the years, the government has had several reforms. Okay, we have established the Curriculum Development Unit. That was not there before. There's an Education Planning Division that was established. I recall because I worked there from 1997 to 2010. And a similar institution was aligned in Nevis. We served both, but Nevis had its own education planner. I recall the first person was Dr. Bronte Gonzalez. Okay, so attempts were made, because you spoke about other secondary schools. Attempts were made to build upon that foundation, because you now had so many children coming in. You had to expand schools. We had to look at taking a deep dive into curriculum, and also there was a World Bank project looking at improving secondary education. Following that, in 2009, there was the white paper presented. And then there was the Education Act. Yes, there's an Education Act that embraced everybody. Yeah. And there was the white paper, and the most recent lens, deep dive we have had on the education system was the UNESCO review, 2016, March 2016, that report was produced. So over time, you had various reforms.
We're actually reforming now currently. We do have current reform going through the process of, 2023. We, no longer do this test of standards is changed.
And that's something that we want to come to.
Mr. Richards, maybe you think we're going to be here until 9?
The changes, I think the point you would want to come away from this conversation, the changes have responded to the varying social contexts, the varying social problems, issues, and the world challenges. We are responding to them through reforms.
And that's exactly what we're going to talk about next. Ladies, stand by, hold that thought, Ms. Rattan. You're watching Conversations, Reflections, and the Way Forward.
We're ready to
like a Lensha say, now sell out the country. My little paradise, yeah. I am a product of the island. I know it's a nice. Wouldn't change if you know what I know. Land of beauty.
The St. Kitts and Nevis Independence 40 Committee presents Conversations, Reflections, and the Way Forward. This interactive discussion series provides an in-depth view of the trials and achievements of the past, as well as the accomplishments, threats, and tremendous opportunities of today, and in the coming years that will transform the Twin Island Federation into a model sustainable island state, serving as a beacon for all. On this edition, we examine universal education and CFBC.
Welcome back to Conversations, Reflections, and the Way Forward. Our guest tonight is Ms. Sharon Rattan, Zanella Claxton, Dr. Busu, that would be Andrea Busu, and Tamo Brown. I introduced you earlier as Byron, I'm so sorry. But so we want to continue our conversation, Ms. Rattan, and you were speaking about the reforms that were made and the introduction of the Curriculum Development Unit, and that actually is something that we want to talk a bit more about now, because earlier we discussed the fact that it was secondary school, it was elementary, that's primary, and for some, secondary. We said that there was no preschool whatsoever. So I want to talk to us a bit about what we looked at in terms of universal education and how did it assist in the development of pre-K learning here in St. Kitts and Nevis.
Okay, correction. There were preschools, but in the more modern times. when I said there was no preschool, that was pre-universal access. Okay, but we have preschools. We have, I think UNICEF has dubbed us one of the best preschool systems in St. Kitts and Nevis, because we have a lot of access. We have many preschools, public and private, under the wing of the government. Okay, in other OECS islands, they're not really under the jurisdiction, the supervision of government. I think they're trying to model us now. Okay, now to the other question, how does that, repeat that last part?
The question was, how did universal education assist in shaping pre-K learning?
Pre-K learning?
Pre-kindergarten.
Or like
Yes.
the early childhood?
Yes.
Oh, it certainly gave access and also the opportunity to prepare the children for kindergarten. And not only that, it sought to respond to the fact that more women were out working. In the 1970s, for that revolution, you find more women went to work. Before that, more women were not working. During the Industrial Revolution, women stepped out and had to work. And we were also helping to solve that problem too, because they had to go out and earn a living. So the family structures in the society helped to, create that movement for the pre-K.
Like Ms. Breton said, when the pre-K institutions, the early childhood institutions started, we know prior to the introduction of such institutions, we had most of the parents stayed home, our grandparents, so it was at-home access, home-based care. But I think that when we talk about normalization and things becoming the norm, over time and throughout the last 40 years, we've seen that access to pre-K is the norm, and it is the expectation, and it, I think, allows us to have a natural transition into the compulsory education age and the compulsory education system into kindergarten. So persons are now expected to, they prepare the children to go to preschool, and then they naturally transition into kindergarten. And so we have a larger rate of access.
And so we looked at pre-K. Now, what about the tertiary level education? Now, of course, and we'll start with the sixth form college, and they have that here in St. Kitts as well too, because before CFBC it was called sixth form. So let's talk a bit about the education system in the sixth form.
Okay, well, I went to sixth form. And so from that perspective, at that time, it was still primarily focused on things like the GCE, which was an English-based examination. It was at CFBC's transition, sixth form transitioning over to Arts, Sciences, and General Studies. That is when CAPE was introduced. So everyone who was doing CAPE, that was not the norm at the time. And we were still, I spoke about colonial shackles, and CXC's introduction of advanced proficiency examinations. That was their answer to, creating curriculum that had contextual, socio-contextual currency. And that was important because earlier the conversation was about, Dr. Busu is saying that, well, are they fit for purpose? And I believe that because we have this Caribbean lens that our children are looking through and that our learners are looking through, they're much more tethered to what it is to be regional and to understand the importance of pride in who they are as Caribbean people, as Black people, as non-Black Caribbean people. And, I think that is an important discussion when we talk about what sixth form was like compared to what the tertiary space is like now with the introduction of the Caribbean Advanced Professional Examinations. However, I would like to add that one of the things that I've been discussing with my VP of Academic and Student Affairs is I believe that we need to introduce some sort of core course, not for credit particularly, that really helps our learners to understand what is their space in society, in the global world, but as a Caribbean person, how do you contribute? And the idea that we should not just be consumers of Western world's influence, but that we should be the influencers and be creators and innovators. And I believe that, we have to figure out how to have that discourse, because our learners are brilliant. And at the institution, we want to be a place for innovation, for change. And so when you were speaking about what is CFBC doing, well, we are in transformation in this very moment, and we are transforming to use pillars to guide us. That was not done before.
Okay.
We are speaking about agile, lean. We are giving people the opportunity within our administrative spaces to try things, to pilot, to experiment. And I believe that is going to trickle down. That cultural shift is going to trickle down in everything we do. And we are also repositioning what it means, like I said earlier, to be a community institution, and that we are not hyper-focused on only providing this type of, rigid move to the bachelor's, but we want to educate everyone, and we have to redefine what is education. We also have to redefine who is an educator, because the world is shifting.
This is A++++. However, I know, however, it is A++, it is the direction. Let's go to what the future of St. Kitts beyond 40 years. It is the future. But Tam, one, I know there are many challenges to get there, because this, Tam was referring to the tertiary level. I think the question and the kind of enriching discussions or discourse we need to have is before that. Because we have seen them, we have seen similar words, expressions in these reforms prior. However, we have to ask ourselves some very deep questions. Are the persons involved in the consultations, do they have that view? Do they understand that view? Because CAPE is very good. I love this CXC approach, what we did to throw off those colonial shackles. But are we achieving that? Are we achieving that, or is it a double-edged sword? Because in the secondary system, we are not getting that holistic view of education anymore. Because everything is tied to, the passing of the CXC subjects. Yeah. And it can be a double-edged sword, and we have to be careful to give them, because we do have to be able to survive. I'm going to say this here, Dr. Brown, Tamil Brown gave a speech a year ago, it was, for the founding lecture at CFBC. She was invited as a guest to give a lecture. That lecture needs to be the basis of the consultations going forward. I don't think that anybody in the government really listened to the speech before. And I think you need to now bring it to the attention of this government. That speech needs to be the basis of the discussion. Everything is interwoven in what you said. The agility of our population is important to be able to survive in the world.
I was going to say, when Dr. Brown was speaking, after she spoke, that, something? All these changes at tertiary level really need to take place from primary and secondary level. Our children need to understand that they can be creators, and we need to facilitate the creativity of our children. They are brilliant minds, and they should not, I remember my former principal, Rosie Andre, who always drilled in our heads that we should not be mere reflectors of other men's thoughts. And I think that what is happening, and even with the HERE policy that you touched on briefly, we as a society expect our children to be creative at tertiary level, but keep them down in the secondary level. We do not facilitate them when it comes to creativity. We want them to regurgitate everything. And then to transition suddenly to being creative becomes a problem. It's like in our society where we do not encourage our children to talk. We do not ask them questions and expect them to think. And so when you give them a mic, and even when you give principals a mic, they shy away because they have not been exposed. What do you think? Why do you think this way? We're not encouraging our children to do that because as teachers in the classrooms, if our children dare to oppose us, we take it personal if we have a difference of opinion. So the training must begin early, transition to high school. Then when you come to tertiary level, you don't have all those issues because they have already been programmed a particular way. Too late for tertiary.
Well, Ian, it is very difficult for me to sit in my seat right now. I'm bouncing internally because everything that is being shared on this panel is already in the plan. And it is rolling out. It's rolling out maybe not as quickly as one would want, but we know the culture in which we function. But we know about the introduction of the Education Sector Plan 2017-2021. Of course, with COVID, we had some delays. We know of, and I think that we have to do a better job across the Federation of really sharing about the curriculum enhancement process and the curriculum reform, because it spans from primary to secondary into post-secondary. And when we, for example, Dr. Busso just spoke about public speaking and the opportunity for children to speak in class and to speak in school. There is a speaking and listening strand in the language arts curriculum, which promotes public speaking, which promotes questioning, which promotes inquiry. We have embedded, and the foundation of the entire process is actually the same 21st century skills. And so many of the initiatives are not just one-off initiatives, they're connected. And as I want to reiterate that as a Ministry of Education, of course, both on St. Kitts and on Nevis, we are working and looking at our sensitization because the entire process was as a result of widespread consultation. Consultation process started right out of the Education Sector Plan in 2017, going into 2018. By 2019, some of the components and the implementation process started. And so when you think about creativity and, for example, we have the characteristics of an ideal St. Kitts Nevis citizen. And you think of an awareness and appreciation of your culture, your context. We think of the importance of understanding physical health, mental health, holistic health and well-being. The introduction of the health and wellness curriculum as one of the 5 core subjects. We talked about reading, writing, arithmetic back in time. Then we know that we had a 4 core, social studies, science, language arts, mathematics. We have a 5th core, health and wellness, which not only speaks to physical health and wellness, but speaks to your psychosocial well-being, because mental health is a taboo subject, but that is part of it. And so I can go on and on, but I won't. But there are so many components which my colleagues here spoke about just in the past few minutes, which are already part of the plan, professionalization of the teaching force and the consultations along that line. So all of those things in terms of the quality of teacher, as we alluded to in a few minutes ago, those things are there and slowly rolling out. Change management and changing our people. We're still stuck in that colonial mindset. We're still the elitist. We have the elitist mindset. And so those are some of the things that are slowing the rollout a bit, but it will happen.
I'd like to interject.
I'd like to interject after you.
Okay. There is a difference between professionalization and innovation.
Yes.
And, the professionalization of the educator, and of course, CFBC trains educators. And we really have to revisit our partnerships, our curricula, because achieving mastery in content is not sufficient for molding children's creativity. So I just want to make it clear that although we are pleased with all of the reforms, we do have to go a little further.
Yes.
Because professionalization is not innovation. And we still shy away from things like that group teaching, that peer facilitation, technology in the classroom, etc. And we are still really very teacher-centered and not student-focused.
Right.
And so, talking about teachers and, them, having credits, like I said, we have to begin to revisit who is an educator, especially when we begin speaking about the skills like the AI, the videography, the sound engineers that we have. You will not find them anywhere with a teacher certification. So are we not going to offer these skills? And so at CFBC, we have to begin doing that balancing act between what is required for education, but what is required for development. And so if it is that we have to run these programs through our adult and continuing education, these things have to happen. They're really non-negotiable. And so I think in the part of the education system that is not tertiary, I think these are valid conversations. Who is the educator? Because soon the skills that are required, you will never find anyone with a degree. The degrees aren't even being offered. So are we just not going to educate our children? We're not going to provide them with the skills because they do not fit into the mold of who a teacher is? So these are all questions to be considered.
And with your permission, I'd like to expand because I listened to you. You're excited. It's not new. I have sat at the curriculum development unit. Everything you said there, we have discussed for many years. Taking on board what Tamu just explained, what is missing is our concept of curriculum. I still see it. The curriculum for educators, so far, it's a document. That we come together, we consult, we say, what are the things that should be in this document? That will not solve the problem. The curriculum is just a dead document. It is enlivened by the teacher. It is enlivened by the environment in the school. They take it, they translate it, they interpret it, they decide how we are going to teach this to kindergarten versus grade 6. Versus, it's the same thread. This is the area that we have to focus on. The capacity of the teachers, whether we have the resources to do it. Tamu referred to all the technology. Are our teachers technologically savvy? Because I have seen the power of a whiteboard. I've seen the power, what that has done to children, the impact it has had on children. Can we afford it? It has a financial implication. What about aligning more to national development? We have had consultations. I think they're too limited, in my view, with just the chamber. But we have to have deeper, more substantive consultations about the kind of citizen we want. How will that citizen function in the 21st century? Will they be agile enough to adapt? Will they be innovative enough to survive? Okay? And these are the deep conversations. Yes, they're all in the paper. They're all there. But the how do we get there is what we have to really look in the mirror and make some changes. Uncomfortable changes, let me emphasize.
So I have good news, ladies. It is not a dead document. And so I know you've heard the talk, but we walk the walk. And if you have had the opportunity, and I invite you over at any point. We have our Wednesday afternoon professional development sessions and very practical performance tasks, and we have the teachers themselves doing it because we have to also understand, like you both alluded to, that our teachers were not educated that way. That's not how they were socialized. And so the learning curve is great, and we have to be forgiving as part of this change management process, and we have to be understanding that it's not a matter of expecting them to achieve great feats. We tell them one thing at a time. So we're working on integration of technology and not showing something on a screen, not a YouTube video on a screen, but how do you go from no-tech, low-tech, high-tech, integrating various technological resources, having students build on those things, and that is what we're doing. So I don't want to go on and on about it. We'll talk about it a bit more at a different time, but we brought it alive.
I also want to think that while we are talking about universal education and access, that we really need to think about, make it practical, our resources. What are we going to do to provide the resources so that CFBC can have all what they need, the Nevis Sixth Form can have, the schools can have what they need. Because it will just be a talk shop if we just have these conversations and we're not going to have practical ways in which we can address these things. As I said earlier, my dear CFBC person, they are the factory that puts out the teachers, and I agree with her that they have to be practical. They need to be taught to be change agents, and they must be willing to change, not just follow the curriculum as a guide and that's it. We need to be practical.
I'd like to interject regarding some practical steps. Schools are notoriously under-resourced. And, the government, they provide us with a subvention, and that is how we pay our teachers, etc. And so, of course, we never have enough. But what we are doing, we have operationalized our research unit. Before, there was basically no one in that unit, and so we are attracting non-tangible resources that way and building capacity. What we have also done, we have a project team now in place and a business development officer soon to come on board. And so we will be reaching out to stakeholders. We are in the process of writing grants because we do intend to become a green campus, because one of the things that severely limits our working capital is our payments to SCELEC. And yes. And so we have to begin to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels, which is in keeping with the sustainable island, development state that, is the thrust of the government.
And we heard a lot about technology in the classroom. What does that look like? You said it was a bit more than whiteboard. So what does it look like really in St. Kitts and Nevis?
It's a lot of things.
Yeah, it's everything. All things. It's how, when we talk about technology in the classroom, that's my area of expertise, technology. We often think about, once again, teacher-centered, right? The teachers using the technology in instruction, and that can take many forms. But what about how the students are utilizing the technology? So for instance, I was a digital media lecturer, right? And an entrepreneurship lecturer, two subjects that are really innovative and creative. And what I would do, I would allow students to submit their assignments, given the rubric, submit your assignment in any medium. Mm-hmm. So they can do it as an animation, they've created podcasts, etc. So it's not just, when we talk about technology in education, it's not just teacher-focused, but also how are we, molding our students to use technology, because they're using it, but how do they use it in learning and peer learning and delivery and discourse? And so, technology in education is everything and all things at the same time. And I would also like to talk about, for me at CFBC, the President Abraham and myself, we were just discussing this last week. And, we were saying that we no longer want this idea of a specific space that is your smart space. I want all my classrooms to be smart spaces. Mm-hmm. And so even that, the ability for the teacher to go into the classroom and work, for students to be wired everywhere and at all places and at all times, all of that is technology in education. And so if we normalize technology in spaces of teaching and learning, then we leave it to the creativity of the teacher and the student to determine how that looks woven into the instruction and learning experience.
And I think added to that.
Hold that thought, Ms. Claxton. What we are going to do is we're going to also take a quick break and we'll be right back. We'll have an extended conversation today because, I believe there's so much that we have to cover still. And so if you ladies don't mind, we'll extend the show to about 1 hour and 30 minutes today. So Okay, we're all in agreement. You're joining us for conversations, reflections, and the way forward.
The St. Kitts and Nevis Independence 40 Committee presents Conversations, Reflections, and the Way Forward. This interactive discussion series provides an in-depth view of the trials and achievements of the past, as well as the accomplishments, threats, and tremendous opportunities of today, and in the coming years that will transform the Twin Island Federation into a model sustainable island state, serving as a beacon for all. On this edition, we examine universal education and CFBC.
St. Kitts, Nevis, had the nicest place, but I ran from here, man, defend it, like a Lensha say. Now sell out me country, my little paradise, yeah. I am a product of the island, I know it's a nice. Wouldn't change if you know what I know, land of beauty.
The St. Kitts and Nevis Independence 40 Committee presents Conversations, Reflections, and the Way Forward. This interactive discussion series provides an in-depth view of the trials and achievements of the past, as well as the accomplishments, threats, and tremendous opportunities of today, and in the coming years that will transform the Twin Island Federation into a model sustainable island state, serving as a beacon for all. On this edition, we examine universal education and CFBC.
Welcome you back to Conversation, Reflections, and the Way Forward as we continue to delve into our topic, universal education, and the Clarence Fitzroy Brent College. We are joined, of course, by Ms. Rathan, Zanella Claxton, Dr. Andrea Busu, and Tamu Brown. Ladies, we want to continue our conversation or pick up where we left off in the sense of technology in the classroom, because how would you respond to someone that asks that the technology becomes a distraction to the student who is really trying to learn, that they would use it for other purposes than it really is intended?
Let me start with a did you know? Did you know that every student between kindergarten and 5th form has access to a Microsoft 365 account with 1 terabyte of cloud space and access to all of the word processing and everything, all of the tools that come with Microsoft. And that came about, it was in place prior to COVID, but during the COVID time, every student was given access, and we've continued that. We've continued to allow students access, because when we think of access, we should also start thinking about remote access. What happens when our students are not in school? What happens when our students, and as we spoke earlier, we have to really prepare them for the world in which they will be transitioning to. Many of our companies here in the Federation, for example, use Microsoft. In Nevis, Nevis Cooperative Credit Union, Bank of Nevis, both on St. Kitts and Nevis, TDC, group of companies. And so when our students leave our system and they've been working within these spaces, they should be in a place where they can transition easily. And one of the concerns businesses have had with our students graduating is the lack of skills that they possess within the transition. And so when you think of education and technology, you think of not just the teaching and learning process, but also the assessment. Students now have the ability to, or teachers have the ability to assess virtually. And students get their real-time scores using a platform that every single child in St. Kitts Nevis has access to. We've done our entire promotion exams. The multiple choice papers, just like CXC, the multiple choice papers, the students are able to go in, log on. They have access to Microsoft Stream. We upload what we need to upload. We have sharing and peer editing capabilities. So you upload and we all go in. And so all of these are examples of the integration of technology. And that's why I said earlier, not just projecting a video from YouTube onto a wall, onto a screen, but now getting the students to learn and to interact. Our schools have computer labs, and students are able to access those and learn basic skills, not just the secondary schools for CXC, but at the primary school level as well.
I'd like to interject. I think that that is exciting, and that, of course, we expect that students will use learning platforms, etc. But when we speak specifically to your question about distraction, I think, once again, the nature of the teacher. The teacher should be allowing them to Google, fact check me. I used to tell my students, fact check me. Yeah, fact check me. They're like, Ms. Brown, you sure about that? Go on your phone. Fact check me. They used to do snaps because entrepreneurship class was lit like that, right? This is what you have to do in the classroom, because if you bore students, they will go on their phones. But if the phone or the tablet is a tool in the space, then they're using it as part of the process. And for us, we are investing in a new learning management system, a new student information management system, with the eye for access, because we have a lot of single mothers, especially in our adult and continuing education classes and our evening classes for office and administration. They have children, they have no help. And so we want to have the ability so that everyone can log in from home and put our classes blended, hybrid, or entirely virtual, and that you have that choice. I mean, maybe I don't have children, but I want that choice, right? And so these are some of the things that we have to consider when we talk about technology and education and access. Similarly, persons with disabilities, persons with neurodivergent issues, they may prefer that space at home. And so although our physical structures are not suited for persons with mobility issues or other issues, by having that learning management space that they can log on from the comforts of their home, and they can engage and get their certifications with no extra stress or burden. That really is what access means in today's world. And so education without technology means that you really don't have access, So you could have free, you could go free. You could go free, but if you have nobody to look after your child, you don't have access. If you have mobility issues and you can't climb the stairs at CFBC, you don't have access. And so technology in itself is a tool for access. And so, I think too that we need to move beyond things like Microsoft Word. I mean, just today, I saw something for everyone who's out there. Commonwealth of Learning has a free course about AI for IT and non-IT persons in your workforce. It's free, it's self-paced, you get a certificate. So just everybody can Google that up. And these are the types of capacity building exercises. And so when we talk about distraction, I feel like this is not a conversation for the 21st century.
But I have to say, Ms. Rattan and Dr. Bush, you can jump in here too, because I understand what you're saying, Ms. Brown, in terms of the parents, and that's fine. I mean, sorry, the teachers.
Yes.
But there's also the issue of the parents, because I can tell you from experience that there have been occasions when children are given their projects and the parents still do it for them. And the children have their phones, and I would suggest that, this is where they learn research in the elementary level, that they have their phones, like you said, they can go on Google, they can go to, whatever site that is a reliable site. And I know, for instance, the St. Kitts, the Nevis archives, the St. Kitts archives, that is, has a website that has a whole bunch of historical facts. And as we speak about independence, of course, the subjects and the assignments will come up about our national heroes, the road to independence and different things that happen. But then you find that the parents are the ones who are doing these homeworks and then don't use it as an opportunity to have their children to learn the research skills.
Well, I think that would speak to, while we are doing all these things to stimulate them in the learning process, teachers have to be trained in how to assess, give that feedback with assignments of this nature. Because the same way the children can go and the parents can go and do it is the same way the teacher must be able to detect whether it is a child's work or not. So we just can't focus on the learning, we also have to focus on the assessment and the evaluation of what they're doing. So it is the whole bandwidth we have to focus on, not just get excited about that part. And I think that is acknowledged. But I want to add to what Tamu said in terms of that learning management space and the fact that we are tying it to our sustainable islands.
A smart parent, yes, would help. We expect parents to assist, but we also expect parents to inform their children about their project. So if you come in and you bring in a project and you cannot define that project, if you cannot say anything about the project, it means that you didn't do the project. So you can't be graded on something you didn't do. And parents need to understand that. If they understand that the teachers are smart enough to assess correctly, they would desist from doing something like that.
I'd like to interject, and I'd like to speak to the power of engagement. And, you know, we have PTAs almost in every school, not at tertiary, but in the lower levels. And I believe that, you know, engagement at that PTA level about, you know, the advantages that your child gains from having to struggle a bit and to stretch a bit, that's actually how one learns. That's actually how your synapses in your brain go off. And so I think, you know, parents, this happens, whether you have technology or not, it's been happening. I remember my child had to do the volcano. If you had to see her volcano, because I didn't help her. And then when you see the other children volcano look like, you know, they come out of factory. And so, you know, this has been happening well before there was any technology. But what is even more complex now with the measurement and assessment, testing and measurement, is the AI. And so, you know, AI can write anything for you.
That's a challenge.
You know, and so at the tertiary level, we have been engaging across the region in a number of workshops. I learned so much. I did not even know that there were AI models that could generate the research for your research paper, not ChatGPT, you know, these are separate AI models. And really, the teacher cannot beat AI.
No.
You can't beat it. And so, you know, we have to really consider, how does one assess in this context of artificial intelligence? And so when we're talking about Microsoft Word and things, we still ain't hit the mark. We didn't hit the mark yet, right? So now we have to see, how do we play nicely with AI? Because the children, they know more about the AI than you ever will. And every time someone builds an AI detector, there's a new AI that beats the detector.
Competition.
So, you know, our conversations have to be different. Schools have to look different. That's why I said teachers have to be different. And I mean, you know, maybe we're gonna have to revisit the reform.
Yeah.
Because change is exponential now. And so in a white paper how many years ago, it has no relevance. And so if we are using that as a roadmap, we have lost. Because what we are doing is an exercise in obsolescence. So we have some very serious problems and, well, challenges to grapple with in the context of technology in the teaching and learning space.
Right. And one of the things that you mentioned, AI, that occurred to me, Ms. Brown, of course, we are familiar with the success and, of course, with the CFBC team, the robotics team. And, of course, you know, we spoke about the creative expression of our students, having them to embrace technology, to open their minds to different expressions that they can use their creativity, their ingenuity. And that goes to the fact of having the less focus on academics, so to speak, and more so on the technical and the vocational aspect in education that some persons would argue is still missing here in the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis?
So, you want commentary? Commentary? Okay. I have a takeover spirit, so you'll have to reel me in. I think there is a false duality when it comes to academics and vocational. I don't see a difference.
There's no difference.
Every chemist has learned a skill. They speak of teaching as a vocation. And so I believe that this distinction and discrete nature of academics versus technical and vocation, AI is a skill, videography is a skill, and each skill has theoretical components. And I believe that it is a form of gatekeeping. I believe that it is a form of elitism, and because we know we still have this stigma attached. But let me tell you, in the world in which we live, if you don't have a skill, everything is skill-based. Mm-hmm. And so I believe that it's not discrete, it's intersectional. And I think that we need to, even at the CFBC AVEC youth skills level, we need to begin speaking about one space. So for instance, there is no reason for a student to matriculate into first-year motor vehicle, let's say at CFBC when up the road they're doing motor vehicle. We are now focused on electrical diagnostics. We are trying to focus on electrical vehicles. We are in the process of finalizing that MOU, solar photovoltaic certifications. This is what we're doing. And so I don't see why everyone cannot begin their journey in the youth skills or the national skills space. And then if you want to specialize, you can seamlessly matriculate into the CFBC space. And so it's about one space of learning and not that, oh, you know, are you doing tech voc? I don't see the purpose of that. I think that you know, we need to do away with that.
And there underlies that dual tension.
Yes.
Because there's a underpinning discrimination because of the history of where these institutions came from. Mm-hmm. And that is one of the weaknesses that I have observed when I was inside the education system and still outside. Very weak on the intersection, you know, that integration. And we need that one space. Mm-hmm. One of the examples I'll give, everybody has to know how to communicate in order to be successful. Yes. Reading is still very important, yes. So everybody still has to learn to do it. It is a skill that is required by everyone. And so whether or not they want to do the soul or whatever, they have to be able to read, they have to be able to write, to communicate. Yeah. It is a skill. Yes. So you cannot say that some children don't have that and they can do that. You know, but we have to be able to integrate it. Yes. Okay? Perhaps they're not learning to read sitting down like this and reading content that's not relevant to them. Mm-hmm. Perhaps you have to use their interests to teach them to read. So it's something that we have to balance. Something we really have to balance in going forward.
I think one of our age-old challenges, and just to continue from where Dr. Brown left off, is that we still, as a society, see the TVET or technical subjects as areas for persons who are not academically inclined. And that could not be further from the truth. And so even in various circles, you would hear, okay, so you're going to have this electrical engineering or electricity class for persons who are not academically inclined. And we have to get beyond that point of seeing that there is a separate space, or viewing it as a separate space and that there's a distinction, and seeing that it really is a space for all.
And of course, that would speak to, as I mentioned before, the robotics team. You know, they are doing some incredible work, and they would have represented St. Kitts and Nevis at various international forums, and they would have received some very good commendations. And so, Ms. Brown, commendation to your team and the work that they're doing up there. Dr. Ricardo.
Yes, so we want to commend Dr. Neil and, of course, CFBC for supporting that initiative. And we wish Dr. Neil, you know, continued success as he moves through with his own iteration of the robotics team with the SKNRE.
So I want to talk a bit now about, as we continue the way forward in terms of CFBC and having the tuition for persons to attend, making free, that the move that the government made last year. How do we see that move affecting, as we spoke about the fact that the grammar school and the socio-economic politics of it, how do we see that affecting our people today? And do you think that that is something that, you know, could be replicated throughout the region by either governments or institutions that, as they have to build up their people? Because I know, for instance, that in terms of UE, where there are UE campuses, that persons are able to attend once you're a citizen of that country, you're able to attend, maybe with some economic costs, so you attend free. But we want to talk about the community colleges because everyone doesn't have a UE campus.
Well, I mean, certainly, if we talk about data, we see that the numbers have increased, which says that, you know, fees, of course, represented a barrier. Just for clarification, so that persons understand, tuition is free, but CXC still requires their fees, UE still requires their fees. I have a controversial opinion on the matter, Minister Hanley. And my opinion is that to really, okay, the tuition is not as much as the fees to sit the exam. And so on average for a semester, an ASGS, let's say, student pays approximately $395 to $400, not tuition, right?
And ASGS would be arts,
science, general sixth form, the CAPE stud. But for 6 CAPE subjects, or to write 5 CAPE subjects, it's more than that. If you're in the Bachelor's of Nursing program, and their tuition has not been fully waived because the government supports them, they receive stipends, teachers receive 4/5 of their salary, etc. But because these are university programs, their tuition is in the thousands. And so, of course, it is a progressive move that removes barriers, but perhaps we need to revisit the nature of the barrier. That's what I would say about that.
Because you have to consider that education is very expensive.
Yes.
It may sound like years ago you had to pay this, but it is very expensive. And whether it's CFBC or you're going to another tertiary institution, it has really become very expensive to study. So in order for CFBC to achieve those milestones that they have set, they need income. So it is something that really needs some discussion as to how it could be resolved.
Yes.
Let me ask a question. It might be a bit controversial. What about its CFBC and its free tuition? The student on Nevis, what happens to them?
Depends on the area. They have the 6th form that does a case. So you're speaking about
tuition free?
That's it.
Teachers coming down?
Do they get tuition free? Do the that's what I'm asking. The students who opt to come to CFBC, do they get that tuition free?
Yes.
Do they get transportation free? Do they?
No.
No.
But I want the question answered. The Nevis 6th form, what is happening there with, are fees paid? Were they ever paid? What's happening
What's
there?
happening
The
there?
fees are paid.
So they pay fees?
They pay fees.
What is the average fee? Do you know?
$300.
Okay.
And that includes their packaging for their shirts and those kind of things. So the $300 is the cap. In terms of transportation, for those programs that are not offered on Nevis, the Ministry of Education provides subsidized. Well, the teachers get a stipend for transportation, and the other students, they receive vouchers throughout the month, 10 vouchers per month.
And but you know, the CFBC is governed by the CFBC Act. We are a semi-autonomous, not a statutory body. We are a semi-autonomous institution, and of course we have, you know, an administrative structure, as we move towards trying to become accredited, there are also certain standards that we must have, that these standards are expensive to maintain. Just the process is an expensive one.
And quite frankly, the question is asked, as I've heard it discussed, where is the personal responsibility? Because at the end of the day, if you make something free, then persons don't cherish it the way they should. For instance, when I was going to school, CXCs were paid free. And I recall that there are some persons, like, they didn't attend the exam. It was like, why is that? Well, because they woke up late. They didn't have it in to come today. They weren't sure they were prepared. Now, when your mother, especially if you have a single mother, sacrifices to pay that CXC, then you are obligated, the extra motivation is there for you to take that personal responsibility to go and sit your exam because the sacrifice was made to pay.
Well, the question is that discourse only relevant for Black people? Because
No.
European countries, their students go to school largely for free, unless, of course, you're going to a Cambridge or an Oxford. So, where does that discourse happen in white spaces? So the question I have, is this a cultural shift that needs to happen? And what personal responsibility is something that is embedded through culture, that requires cultural norms. And so, culture takes time to change. And, that's the question I have. Are people in Europe having the same discourse? It's rhetorical, I don't know. But I know this is the discourse we have when it's Black people going
But I will
free.
tell you.
I'm not saying it doesn't exist. We see it all the time. Right. But what I'm saying is that if we have universal access, then do we bog down that pathway with this discourse instead of figuring out how to address the issue that we are seeing? Because is the answer removing the fee?
It's a valid question.
That's the question, yes.
Also, and perhaps it's a question that our leaders, our government has a courageous question.
Yes.
They have to ask with some of these, international agencies who would want to dictate and said, well, you have these people going here for free. You can do this. It's the geopolitics, I think, she is referencing in this context.
Yes, not so articulately and eloquently as Ms. Rattan, but
it's the geopolitics.
But it may be a symptom within our culture. Correct. Because a number of us had education, had scholarships, and we showed up.
Yeah.
Because if you didn't show up, you would have to pay that money the next year if you failed your courses. I knew my parents could not support me with a master's or a full PhD. So of course I showed up for my classes with my scholarship. I showed up. I think that in our culture, there's a lot of things that are shifting, and how we valued education previously, some people just don't value it as much as we used to value it. And so there's this expectation that you will get handouts, and I need to go to your home and wake you up so that you can go to class.
And then to that is that dual theory, I must say, with academics versus skills. Because some persons out there are some schools of thought out there who say, well, you don't need any academics, I can do X, Y, Z. But then maybe you could do it in a small space in your own country. But can you leave St. Kitts and do it and survive?
But even in a skill, you have to get up.
Well, you have to get up, that's what I'm saying.
Even in a skill, you have to take the responsibility of learning the skill, because it doesn't go through your head like osmosis. You have to show up. So whether it's a skill or it's academic, you have to take that responsibility of showing up.
I think
some schools
comes
of
down.
thought think that, well, I have a skill, that seeps into me. I have a skill,
It doesn't.
I'm a plumber. Everybody in the community knows that I'm a plumber.
But I think it comes down to reciprocal accountability and responsibility as well. Where are the consequences? Yes, we pay your tuition, we pay your fees, you don't show up, nothing happens. And, it's a conversation at a different level. But implementation and political will And all of those things actually contribute to some of the challenges that we're seeing and the shift in the paradigm shift in our culture and the approach to education and perhaps even the emphasis on the importance of education and attaining it and the hard work that has to go into acquiring whatever you're pursuing.
One of the solutions that I've tinkered with in those same European countries, they may go free, but they have programs that they have to serve in the army. They have a lot of civic programs tied back to the country. So you have to serve in the army for a year, or when you're finished studying, you have to do whatever amount of community volunteering.
Or serve in a remote area that is lacking for that professional thing. You have to go there, and you can actually get, even if you pay tuition, you can get your tuition forgiven if you go in the US, if you go to a remote area where that skill is needed, you can work there and you're forgiven your tuition. You know, those are incentives that are
So maybe we just have to get creative with the leverage.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. And of course, when our students do go off to, of course, most of them in any case, they go off to university, we see that they excel. We see that they do not have that drive, that passion, that motivation to become first in their class, tops in their class, to be successful in whatever career path they choose. And so, you know, that also speaks to maybe the local context as opposed to what it is when they're out there. Right. Okay, so ladies, we're almost out of time. I want to leave with this question now. And I would like to hear from everyone on this regard. What role would you say that universal education played in our quest for independence?
You know, a quest for independence?
Yes.
How it helped us to gain independence, how it contributed.
Role, what role? It's from your perspective. What is your interpretation? Where do we start?
Well, I mean, I'll start. Without universal education, we would not have achieved the level of development that we currently have. That is clear. I think, though, that the question is universal education the same as universal access? And I think as we move forward for the next 40 years, that is the question that we need to have more discourse about, and we have to make sure that they are synonymous.
I think that as universal access, universal education, I think that as a government, as a people, whoever is leading in government, need to make education a priority. And not only a priority in talking, but a priority in funding. Because if you don't have the funding, you don't have the resources. Moving forward to the next 40 years, I think that we need to think realistically of how we can achieve such by becoming creative in the way we get funds to fund the system. For example, I had a discussion with my siblings once, and my brother said, you know, and I had the same idea, but when he said it, he said, the sin tax. And that happens in several countries where you tax alcohol and cigarettes, and they're heavily taxed, and a portion of the money goes towards health and education. And then it seems as though in St. Kitts and Nevis, we have a fund that is a deep fund, the CBI. Maybe a percentage of that needs to go to education. And I'm hoping Dr. Jeffrey Hanley and others and the Prime Minister, they're listening, because apart from the fact that we probably need health insurance, universal health insurance, I think that maybe a percentage of that fund can go to funding education. Our teachers getting better salaries, education being much more attractive, our children having access, because we fool ourselves into thinking that our children are having access when they really aren't. Some of them may not have internet at home. They're fighting for survival. And you know, if you are thinking about your basic needs, you don't have time to think about education. You don't have time to wake up if you're going to think about what am I going to eat for breakfast? What is my uniform going to be like? What is my mother going to do? All of these things must be in place, and there must be some safety net for the children who cannot have access, those who belong to families that just can't afford it, and they are in our community. So providing that, the finances, would be a step in the right direction for the next 40 years. Let us put our mouth where our money is, like get it going. Teachers should not be paid the least in the professions. I mean, they teach everybody else to be what they are. So we need to revisit that. So yes, tax people, get some money. Tax, alcohol, cigarette, get some money. We can get it to CFBC and the other schools.
When I think of universal education and its role in relation to independence, my mind automatically goes to freedom. And throughout this conversation this evening, one of the recurring themes for me has been we still have remnants of the colonial mindset, maybe more than remnants. We still have the elitist mentality. Mm-hmm. And most of what happens in education is driven by perception. What will somebody's perception be of what is happening? And so perhaps I would say, even though we have made strides in terms of offering universal education, in terms of working towards, and we're not there yet, access to the level that we would be satisfied, one of the things that we have to work on as a society as we go forward is reshaping our mindset and getting us closer to that point of true liberation and freedom and a true independence.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I believe that the access provided many years ago has given many Kittitians and Nevisians the opportunity to better understand themselves and the world out there. We have to deal then with universal education. I somehow struggle with the fact that we have had so many opportunities, and to some extent, education is being used as a control weapon because of those tensions of elitism and awareness, etc. The challenges that we face now have to be given more substantive attention. I'll quote from this song, substance over hype. Too much hype. I think we still have too much hype, and we are not addressing many of the issues that we have. We know in our minds, we are very much aware of what we want. Many of the educators, they know where we have to go. But there is something in the middle that's not connecting. And we have to have many more awareness sessions and not just formal sessions of talking about. We have to have some strategy to get out there and get people to understand, not only amongst our people, but certain groups of technocrats, so that those resources could be mobilized. As I say, I think we're losing our opportunity to leverage many things. Maybe it's how we are pitching the arguments. Maybe it's how we are pitching, the justifications. But they are, with all that I've heard here tonight, there are lots of justification for more resources. Because we have to be able to show, with the use of the technology, with the use of a better equipped teacher, feedback systems, monitoring systems, this is the kind of citizen we are likely to get. That would give us a more prominent position in the region and internationally. So we have to be able to do that, attentive to be addressed. But I think we know better. We have been exposed, or populace, we know better, but we have to have where we are to where we are going. But it has been a great journey on our education. We have accomplished much. I don't want people to walk away thinking the panelists say we have not. We have accomplished much given where we have come from. But we need to tap into ourselves more so that we can do more.
And of course, as the world continues and technology continues to evolve, there's so much more that needs to be done.
Yes.
There will always be more as we prepare our people to move forward in this world and the demands that it has in a globalized industry. Sharon Rattans, Zanella Claxton, Dr. Andrew Busu, and Tamu Brown. Thank you, ladies, so much for joining us for this edition of Conversations. Clearly, the conversation has to continue, and I wish we had more time. But like Dr. Busu said, we might have been here all night.
We've been all night.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you for having us. Yes.
And I'd like to thank you, persons who would have joined us for this edition of Conversation. We encourage you to join us next week. We'll be coming to you from Nevis, across the Sister Isle, where we'll be discussing constitutional reform. So we encourage you to join us then. That will be next week, Thursday at 6 p.m. For now, I'm Ian Richards. Thank you for joining us for Conversations, Reflections, and the Way Forward.
It's finished?